Good afternoon, how are you? I'm guessing at this point in the week, the last thing you want is to hear somebody drone on for 30 minutes without any slides. But I'm really, really thrilled to be here. I get to see old friends I haven't seen since the last summit I attended in Namibia, 2013. I get to be in the really kind and expert hands of Shannon and Gabby and Ken and Alice and their unbelievable dream team. And I get to be in warm and welcoming Hokkaido. I've been living in Japan for 36 years now, and I've been lucky enough to travel all the way across Okinawa. I've seen most of Shikoku. I've visited lots of the interesting parts of Kyushu. I actually got to cover the '98 Winter Olympics in Nagano, the first Olympics here after Sapporo. And I once met the man who is said to have invented karaoke, though when I met him, he was working as a dog trainer. But in all these years, having published maybe 60 articles on Japan and 3 books, I had never set foot in the largest prefecture in the country, Hokkaido, till this week. And every time I'm traveling with my Japanese wife and we see somewhere really extraordinary, Antarctica or Tibet, she'll look around in wonder and say, wow, this is almost like Hokkaido. We live near the ancient capital of Kyoto, and most of you will know it was the capital for more than 1,000 years, since the year 794. It's blessed with 17 World Heritage Sites, 1,600 temples, and Kyoto is often said to be the most visited city in the entire world outside of Mecca. In 2019, 89 million people came to Kyoto Prefecture, and the government is really hoping to boost that number substantially. But my daughter runs a little coffee stand on the lane that leads up to the most sacred Shinto shrine in Kyoto. And she tells me that most of her guests, local and international, say to her, you know, Kyoto's great, the place we really want to see is Hokkaido. And after 4 days here, I really can understand that. I will never forget the day of adventure I spent with the Ainu. I'll never forget getting to see the Sapporo Dome, where Shohei Ohtani first began playing more or less as an outfielder and a pitcher at the same time. And I will never forget the amazing cuisine we've had here, including at the Autumn Festival along Odori Koen, where I saw beef sushi, squid with mashed potatoes, 1,000 dishes I've never seen before. Although we've been waiting for a long, long time to be here, because as you remember, this event, like everything in the global pandemic, was delayed and postponed and made virtual and delayed again. What that means for me is that it's 4 years since Shannon invited me to come here. And what that also means is I have had 1,400 days to think about what I could usefully inflict on you. And my first thought was I could shamelessly pitch to you my brand new book, The Half-Known Life, because it does involve a lot of adventure. It features trips right the way across the Himalayas, into the depths of the Australian outback, through Iran and North Korea, from Jerusalem to Varanasi, into war-torn Kashmir, into war-shattered Sri Lanka. But in truth, there are many reasons why I couldn't recommend my book to you. And one of them is that the first time I presented it in public earlier this year in California, an old friend who had been an editor of mine drove 6 hours through a snowstorm to engage me in a conversation. And when he arrived, he said, Pico, I've known you all this time. I know you're interested in many things, but I never knew about your passion for karate and your life in Hollywood. And I rolled my eyes and wondered what he was going on about. And then he opened the copy of the book of mine he'd just bought in LA. And there on page 82, as I'm leading the unsuspecting reader around the red dirt intensity of inner Australia, suddenly 10 whole pages of my book were missing, And in their place were 10 pages of the recently published autobiography of Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid. Unbelievable. I mean, you wouldn't credit it if you saw it in a book or a novel. It was true. And then, page 92, I'm guiding the reader around the hushed majesty of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Again, 10 pages of my sacred text gone, 10 more pages about working with Pat Morita and the mystery of the martial arts. And it must be said that my friend was really thrilled because he figured this book was a collector's item. He'd got 2 books for the price of 1. And it must be said that this is the first time in 35 years anything has appeared in any of my books that's of interest to my wife, who is, she's been a Ralph Macchio fan since she was 3 years old, I think. But it's one of the many reasons why I couldn't really tell you to read the book. So instead, I thought, as we're preparing to depart tomorrow and to scatter across the planet to our homes, maybe the most useful thing to address this evening would be what we've learned from this kind and beautiful country and from this remarkably wonderful and unique island of Hokkaido. Whenever one of my friends is visiting Japan for the first time, I tell her the most important thing is to go to a baseball game, even if she has no interest in baseball. For one thing, not so much in Hokkaido, but in the rest of Japan, you probably know that our Japanese friends can be quite shy and reserved when you meet them on the streets in public. Not in the baseball stadium. They are more boisterous and welcoming and passionate than anyone you'll see in Boston's Fenway Park or Yankee Stadium in New York. An old lady will crane forwards to give you a piece of her fried octopus. A man dressed from head to toe as a tiger will enfold you in a bear hug. Suddenly, as a foreigner, you're no longer an outsider, you're part of the team. The other really useful thing about going to a baseball game here is that you can see how Japan wonderfully takes the all-American pastime and makes it something deeply Japanese. In Japan, as nowhere else in the world, if the score is level after 12 innings, the game ends in a tie. Which means that often the teams are not playing to win, but in order not to lose, because a team with a lot of ties can finish ahead of a team with more victories. And in fact, when the great American manager, Bobby Valentine, was invited over here to coach a very mediocre team, he led this awful squad to a second-place finish, and he was instantly fired. Why? Well, said the team's management, because of his emphasis on winning. I think in Japan, the sense is that if you have an individual winner, you have an individual loser. And it makes much more sense to make everybody feel like a winner. I have, for 19 years now, been playing ping-pong 3 times a week in my neighborhood with the people who live around me, many of whom are very elderly, in their 80s. I'm lucky to win 1 point every 3 months off them. I'm the only foreigner in the group. At my towering 5'7.5", I'm pretty much the tallest. And at 66, I'm the youngest, so I'm a kind of teen idol. I'm the Justin Bieber of Nara, improbably. But what really shocked me when I first began playing with my friends is that we only play doubles. We never play singles. And we play best of 2 sets. So very often there's no winner and there's no loser. And of course, somebody keeps track of the score in each game to make sure that it's really exciting, but nobody keeps track of who is winning the games. And in any case, we choose our partners by lot every 6 minutes. So if you do happen to win a game, you're very likely 6 minutes later with a new partner to lose. And I quickly noticed also that the really skillful players will use their skills to convert a 9-1 lead into a 9-9 game in which everybody is deeply involved. And so the result is that when I go home at the end of an evening and my wife says, "How was it?" I say, "Fantastic. I don't know if I've won or lost. I just know that I've had a really good time." And I think the same is true of all my friends. By contrast, when I go back to California, I play singles against my arch rival, who's another aged English writer. And if I chance to defeat him, I can't sleep all night because I know he's plotting revenge. If he chances to defeat me, I can't sleep all night because I'm so upset I missed that backhand topspin in the third game. In Japan, I sleep very well every night. And in fact, I'd say the best book by a contemporary living foreigner to introduce you to Japan is a work called You Gotta Have Wa, You Gotta Have Harmony, by an American, Robert Whiting, who's lived in Tokyo for 60 years now and explains everything about Japan and its relations to the outside world through the keyhole of baseball. I was really excited when I went to an Ainu museum in Arashiyama on Monday. I saw the non-Ainu residents of Japan referred to as Wajin, which literally means the people of harmony. And I think for me, Japan really functions like a symphony orchestra. So everybody is working from the same score. Each person plays her part absolutely perfectly. And the result is this majestic harmony that I think most of us have enjoyed over the last few days. And I think Japan can sometimes be a little unsettled by us foreigners because we come into the country, we don't have a copy of that score, maybe we don't even know how to read music, and so we threaten to disrupt or even destroy this exquisite melody that they've worked so hard over 1,400 years to construct. And I sometimes think that Japan functions so flawlessly on its own terms that it's a little reluctant to function according to the terms of the larger world. And of course, in our global economy, it's sometimes suffered for this reason. The Japanese economy hasn't done so well the last 30 years. But culturally, it means Japan is as interesting as anywhere around, because it's not like anywhere else. It's deeply connected to its ancient roots. It's constantly surprising. And where I live, the number of international visitors has surged by 500% in just 7 years, and I think it's going to continue surging for the next many years to come. If any of you were to visit the little two-room, $500 a month apartment that my wife and I have shared for 30 years, you'd be really disappointed. There's no tatami mats. There's no shoji screens. Our apartment is completely Western, and we live in an entirely Western neighborhood. No temples in the neighborhood, no shrines, no zigzagging, mazy alleyways. Almost all the houses are single residence, Western-style structures with a basketball net in the front and a German car at the entrance. And even the two main drags are literally called school dory and park dory, using the English language words to persuade all of us that we've attained our dream of living in California. But our completely modern suburb, which is younger actually than my kids, is on the outskirts of the ancient city of Nara, which in the year 710 was the first permanent Buddhist capital of Japan. And Nara today is a busy, very populous city, more people there than in Cleveland or in Pittsburgh. But if you go right to the heart of downtown, and some of you may have done that, at the very center of Nara is the largest municipal park in the whole of Japan. And it's filled with temples, the largest Buddha in the world, the second most sacred Shinto shrine, groves of wild plum trees, sutra houses, a pavilion on a pond, and most visibly, 1,200 wild deer who walk around downtown, completely ruling the place. If you go to our 5-story glass and concrete city hall, you'll find stags seated on the front steps. Check into the most elegant hotel, the Nara Hotel, you'll be greeted not by doormen, but by doe. And I think this really speaks for my sense of Japan, which at its heart has this great expanse of nature and this beautiful, liberating emptiness. The suburbs may be full of sort of post-war mishmash global surfaces, but the core and the heart of the place is entirely Japanese. And I sometimes think of the country as an old man in a Planet Hollywood t-shirt. He's hip, he's global, he's up with the latest fashions, but that makes him no less old and no less Japanese. If you do come to my neighborhood, when you get off the bus at the bus stop, you'll be greeted by a large map, and that map shows every single house in the area and who lives there. And it's really a way of stitching us together into this sense of collective harmony, this sense of community and shared responsibility. And it's a way of reminding us that everybody is looking out for everybody else's kids. When my friends do visit, they often ask about religion, and quite a few of them know something about Buddhism and its essential notion of interconnectedness. As you know, the I is tiny, almost non-existent in Buddhism, and the we is very huge. But next to the wooden Buddhist temples, which are generally used for funerals, they'll see those bright orange torii gates of Shinto shrines, which are used for weddings and festivals. And again, many of you probably know that the heart of Shinto, as of most indigenous cultures, including the Ainu culture, is the idea that every blade of grass and every speck of dew has a soul. And I think that's one reason why if you go into the 7-Eleven, the young woman at the cash register will hand over your bar of Kit Kat or your can of Coke with such reverence and care. For her, it has a spirit. My wife tells me that when she was a little girl, if she kicked the dinner table in frustration, her father would say, "You have to apologize to that table. It has a spirit. It has feelings that you have hurt. It's done nothing to hit you. In fact, it's helping you to enjoy your dinner. To kick the table is as bad as kicking your brother." And I think many of you are probably familiar with the decluttering guru, Marie Kondo. And when she tells you to cover your teddy bear's eyes before you throw it out, or to ask your cashmere sweater if it's sparking joy, I think to those of us outside Japan, it can sound quite strange or foreign. To my neighbors, it wouldn't at all. Every time I step into an elevator with my wife, she gives it a name. This is Tom. And suddenly the otherwise anonymous experience becomes something different. And again, of course, anime is the expression of an animist culture. So if you see the great movies of Miyazaki, like Princess Mononoke or My Neighbor Totoro or Spirited Away, again, you'll see every tree, every rock, every stream has a soul. And this being Japan, as you probably noticed, Buddhism and Shinto live in perfect harmony. Very often you'll see a temple right next to a shrine. I begin to think, though, after all these years of living here, that the secret religion of Japan, though, may be the play of seasons. And every late November, when the autumn blazes absolutely cloudless and blue where I live, and the trees are a festival of red and yellow and gold, nearly all my neighbors will put on their Sunday best and stream out into the temple gardens and parks to observe the turning of the leaves. And I think they're doing this a little bit as people in the West used traditionally to go to church. In other words, to be joined inside a congregation, to be reminded of forces much larger than we are that put us in place, and to be reminded of these ageless cycles of changelessness and change. Because almost every year, the autumn looks very similar. But we and the world around us is different each time, and so the interaction has maybe an added poignancy each passing year. And I feel that my Japanese neighbors are very sensitive to the fact that this great blaze of colors in late November speaks for the coming of the cold and the dark and monochrome winter. But they also know that the arrival of autumn means the first step towards the rebirth of spring. And of course, here in Hokkaido, with its great cathedral forests and its shrines to nature and the world-celebrated snow festival on Odori Koen every February, nobody needs to be reminded of this. You probably know that not far from where we're sitting, there's a place called Matsumae Park that has 250 different species of cherry blossoms, 10,000 trees in all. And the last I read, they were all tended to by a cherry guardian, a 91-year-old gentleman who was sensitive to every mood and nuance of the sakura. Where I live, there are 2 trees that actually, 1,000-year-old camphor trees, have been designated as national living treasures. And 234 trees that are officially registered as guardians of the soul, as sacred spaces, as important to the city's welfare as the great wooden temples all around. And I remember when I first met my wife, she took me out into a park and she pointed to 2 intertwined trees. And she said, "That's me and that's you." And to be honest, in all my life, I'd never been compared to a tree before. But I realized that it was her way of saying that she was part of the natural order and it was part of us, and the responsibility extends in both directions. And I think I should honestly say that these are some of the reasons why I first left my very comfortable and stimulating job in New York City and moved to Japan. Because I felt that when I was growing up in England and later in the US, I was trained very much to speak, but never to listen. And I felt more than anywhere I had experienced, Japan was the place where you could learn attention. And I always felt in my colleges and schools that we were being encouraged to push ourselves forward, and that what I really needed was to push myself back, to fade into the woodwork, to learn to become invisible. And again, I thought Japan might be the ideal place for that. I think as a kid, I was always encouraged to think of myself as this kind of lone object, me against the world. And what I needed to learn about was harmony and community and family. And Japan is so profoundly founded on all of those. And soon after I moved here, I noticed that every time I walked down the street where I live, if I saw a piece of trash, I would reflexively bend down and pick it up. I wasn't doing that when I was living in New York City. And if I had been, I'd never have got to the end of the block. I'd still be walking down the street in Midtown Manhattan. I also learned that the ideal date in Japan involves you and your loved one going to a concert, Metallica perhaps, enjoying it hugely, and going home together and never saying a word, except maybe tanashikatta, that was fun. Because words pull us apart and silence brings us together. Many of you will have seen classic Japanese paintings by Hiroshige or Hokusai, and you'll have noticed that the faces are featureless. Really, the human presence is almost generic, and the subject of the painting is nearly always the falling of the snow, or the turning of the leaves, or some great mountain like Fujisan. And again, if you read a haiku, you realize it's not about the author and his or her emotion. It's really an invitation to a shared emotion. In fact, one celebrated haiku says, "In the cherry blossom's shade, there are no strangers." In other words, when everybody flocks out in early April and sits under the blossoming cherries and sings songs and gets drunk, they're united in something much larger than themselves. And it's the external nature that is stitching them together. Sometimes, I think when it comes to individual enterprise or freedom or innovation, this can have its drawbacks. I remember when I first arrived here, I came, as I said, to learn about harmony and community and responsibility. And when I met my Japanese wife, all she wanted to do was be in California. She was longing for freedom from tradition, for individual possibility, for broad horizons. But I have been traveling the world for 49 years now, everywhere from Antarctica to Zanzibar, and I would say I've never met a kinder, more responsible, more thoughtful, and more efficient society than Japan. And I really felt this during the pandemic. I was going back and forth every 6 or 7 weeks between California and Japan. And here, life really continued almost undeterred. Of course, everybody was worried, and of course, they were taking sensible precautions, but kids were going to school, their parents were going to the office. In the year 2020, the death rate actually went down for the first time in 11 years in Japan because people were being so careful. And I just was reminded that this country has gone through 1,400 years of tsunami and earthquake and warfare and fire and plague. And so nobody was surprised when suddenly reality made a house call. And every time I flew back into LAX, I felt I was entering this cauldron of panic and rage. People seemed very shocked that suddenly their plans had been upended. And I was reminded, probably all of you recall, after the terrible tsunami of 2011, which swept 18,500 people to their deaths, we would all see on television the footage of people, Japanese citizens, standing absolutely silently, patiently, without a word of complaint, in long lines as they waited for shelter or food. And it wasn't that they weren't suffering. They were human enough to feel that they'd lost everything, and often everybody in the world. But they just realized that everybody around them had suffered as much, or maybe more. And they didn't want to increase the burden that their neighbors were carrying by inflicting on them the story of their own suffering. And I think the great beauty of being part of a whole like this is that so often the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as in a symphony orchestra. Lots of people are playing well, but they produce something transcendent. And the other beauty of being part of a whole is that you and I are mortal. We're like autumn leaves. None of us is going to last forever. People come and go. But the whole keeps on rolling forwards. And I think it gives this very reassuring sense of continuity and stability that's not always easy to find in our tumultuous world. So as we come to the end of this unforgettable week, I'm sure all of us are thinking about what the souvenir is that we can most usefully take home tomorrow. And I've been thinking that that Buddhist notion of interconnectedness is really a useful one, because it reminds us that we are dependent on everybody else, and everybody else is dependent on us. 2,500 years before we had an internet, the Buddhists had this notion of Indra's net. And in our global neighborhood, of course, we feel it every single day. Somebody sneezes in Wuhan, and somebody in Dallas gets sick. Or there's a slowdown in the economy on Wall Street, and the consequences are felt in Sao Paulo and Abidjan and Mumbai. And I think the butterfly effect determines our life more than ever before. I'm not a Buddhist, but I can see that my destiny is dependent on all of you. And I think the other thing that I'm so glad to learn from in Japan is to stretch my sense of what is animate, and to give myself, therefore, a greater sense of responsibility towards everything around me. I was in a Patagonia store in California last week, and I saw a slogan that caught this way very well: protect the oceans so the oceans can protect us. And in this time of environmental crisis, I think we're moved more than ever to realize how much we rely upon natural resources that we don't always see as living, and how much they rely upon us. And I think at this point, with extreme weather everywhere, pretty much everyone in the world knows this and feels this, but Japan lives it, I think, day to day with more sincerity than any society I've encountered. So as we scatter and disperse tomorrow, I think that's a really useful idea to take home. I always think of this ATTA community as a fantastic tribe. Really, as I say, a community, but a floating, movable community. And for 11 and a half months every year, we go across the planet, we enjoy these extraordinary adventures, and then every September, we converge to share those adventures and to have our appetite quickened for fresh, emancipating adventures. So I think if we take the spirit of what we learn from these 5 days or 10 days together back out into the world and extend it to our natural environment and the people around us, they will be happier, and we too. You probably all know well that sayonara in Japan is the word for goodbye. But in a day-to-day way, the much friendlier and more relaxed way of saying that is ja mata, meaning see you later. So I think all of us this evening or tomorrow will want to be saying ja mata to Hokkaido. I think most of us are hoping to see it again and again and again. And ja mata to everybody else. I think we're all really looking forward to seeing each other as soon as possible. Thank you.